Hi, I'm Mark, and I like to talk about UK politics and, yes, Brexit from an outside view. Although I do know the UK from the inside as well, so don't worry. The new British government under Keir Starmer will not reverse Brexit. However, it's likely to be more open than the previous government to agreements that facilitate the movement of goods with the EU. At least that is what experts in Brussels and London expect. Brexit has brought new customs regulations for the movement of goods between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Some business representatives and politicians in the EU are confident that the newly elected Labour government in the United Kingdom will be able to agree rules that will make trade across the English Channel easier. Ulrich Hoppe, the Director General of the German-British Chamber of Industry and Commerce in London, is hoping for an agreement on the mutual recognition of sanitary and phytosanitary standards that must be met by food or plant products. This would facilitate customs controls on transport between the EU and the UK, and also the practical implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, says Hoppe. And for Bernd Lange, from the Social Democrats here in Germany, the chairman of the Trade Committee in the European Parliament, what he calls dynamic alignment of SPS standards is of central importance, especially for trade in agricultural products. Labour is interested in this, he says, and Lange can imagine that further simplifications can be agreed with the new government in London. Since Brexit, for example, EU players have needed an EURI number for customs clearance in the UK trade. German companies must have this number issued by the General Customs Directorate in Dresden. And according to Lange, mutual certification of trustworthy companies would be easier then. Mutual recognition of the CE quality mark, which the defeated British government did not abolish despite plans to the contrary, would also make the exchange of goods easier. Hoppe believes that the Labour government has political leeway when it comes to recognizing EU standards such as the CE mark or the EU chemicals regulation REACH, because these issues are not in the public eye. The situation is different for everything to do with the free movement of people. For example, when it comes to residence permits for EU students and workers, or the conditions for sending employees of EU companies. Hoppe expects that Labour will not radically change previous British policy in this area. Although Labour won 62% of the seats in Parliament, it only received 34% of the votes. And the party will certainly act cautiously when it comes to migration or labour market policy, so as not to be punished again in the next election immediately. Lange is hopeful that at least rules for the easier recognition of professional qualifications can be agreed with the Labour government. He sees better opportunities for cooperation than with the Tory government in the fields of security, energy and climate protection policy, emissions trading and raw material regulation. When it comes to climate protection, the EU and the United Kingdom are among the world's pioneers. That is why they could also act together with third countries in the planned imposition of countervailing duties for the burden on their own companies through climate protection requirements, says Lange. These duties are known in the EU by the abbreviation CBAMs. But Lange also warns that tact should be shown in negotiations with London. The impression must not be created that the EU wants to impose its rules on the United Kingdom, he says. The new British government is indeed seeking closer cooperation with the EU on trade issues, but has ruled out a return to the Union. For example, Great Britain and the European Union share the same food standards, at least as Trade Minister Jonathan Reynolds told Sky News. If we can sell more whiskey and salmon in a market that is so important to us, then we should explore such possibilities. Reynolds, of course a Labour politician, blamed the previous Conservative government for the existing trade problems. To be honest, it's very much in Britain's national interest to build a relationship with Europe that is not determined by the internal politics of the Conservative Party, said Reynolds. EU diplomats and German business representatives had criticized the stubbornness of the ousted government. Reynolds now hinted at sensible, pragmatic solutions, for example, in the mutual recognition of professional qualifications or visa rules for artists and musicians. And it would make sense to remove such hurdles. Reynolds firmly ruled out a return to the EU. We are not open to the free movement of people. That is part of EU membership, and we will not take that up again, said Reynolds. In principle, however, close cooperation is in the mutual interest of the European Union and the United Kingdom. Great Britain left the EU at the end of January 2020 and has not been a member of the EU Customs Union and the internal market since 2021. Despite a free trade agreement, there have been hurdles in the bilateral exchange of goods since then. But the British have even more to do internally at the moment as well. For example, the number of prisoners in Great Britain has doubled in the last 30 years, and the country has a prison problem. The prisons are overcrowded and the conditions are catastrophic. The new government is facing a problem that has long been ignored and, of course, is not easily solved. Britain has magnificent palaces to offer, but one of the biggest problems is the gloomy places. The country's prisons are threatened with overcrowding. The justice system could soon be faced with the question of where to house criminals. It's worse than I thought, says the new Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the Labour Party. His government indeed took over from the Conservative Tories a good week ago and is now taking a first step. And according to media reports, it is considering releasing criminals earlier than before. At the end of June, an association warned that it was only a matter of days before prisons would run out of space. Within weeks, this would pose a risk to the public, wrote the Prison Governors Association even. There are currently around 87,500 people incarcerated in England and in Wales, with around 88,900 available places. And the BBC quoted a prison employee as saying, "We put 2 prisoners in a cell where the toilet was leaking. We had no other place. The smell was so bad you couldn't breathe." In the past 30 years, the number of people in prison, as I said, has doubled, even though the crime rate is declining. That at least was written by the Institute for Government think tank. One reason for the crisis is longer prison sentences. The sentences imposed in 23 at the Crown Courts, that's the criminal courts that hear serious cases, were on average a quarter longer than in 2012. This is partly because more serious offences were judged then. But the same offences are now also being punished with longer sentences, as the think tank's paper says. The sentence imposed for robbery, for example, was 13 months longer last year than in 2012. The British justice system is more focused on punishment than on rehabilitation anyway. That's an idea that is emphasized here in Germany. In particularly serious cases, for example, a whole life order can be imposed. That's a life sentence under which people are actually never released again, but we have that here too. According to the think tank, the number of people in custody has increased in recent years because many cases are piling up in the courts or have to go back to prison because they violate probation conditions. And there's one devastating conclusion here. Several justice ministers and prime ministers have not taken care of the situation. Britain's new government is therefore facing several challenges in the justice system. To relieve the burden on prisons, the new Minister of Justice, Shabana Mahmood, could announce that prisoners will be released when they have served 40% of their sentence instead of the previous 50%. This is intended to relieve the pressure on prisons, but does not apply to serious violent crimes or sexual offences. Critics warn, however, that early releases also carry a risk and could even create new problems. Emergency measures by the previous government already provided for offenders to be released up to 10 weeks early. In some cases, there is confusion, writes the Institute for Government. Many still have no home, which poses challenges for the probation system. The think tank believes that reducing the minimum time is basically an effective idea. In addition, one could consider sending more people to house arrest with an electronic ankle bracelet for minor offenses. In the long term, however, more prisons would have to be built and the sentencing system would have to be reconsidered. So there's not only the external discussions going on, the 14 years of the last governments have left some more work to do. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.